Om Shanti. Sister Denise, Banji, let us welcome everyone to this session.
Om Shanti. Om Shanti.
So, another interesting session. This time the topic is on spiritual relationships. And when I first heard this topic, the first thought that came to my mind is how appropriate and somehow long overdue. It's like, how come nobody thought of requesting for a topic like this or suggesting for a topic like this? So, Sister Denise, thank you for, again, coming up with a very interesting and, as I said, very timely topic.
Well, thank you very much, Sister Rose. And it's always a great delight to be with this gathering of wonderful souls. And I'm talking about spiritual relationships because it's been coming up. And there is an eternal question which comes up again and again. What is this? Is this a family? Is this a religion? Is this an organization? What exactly is this? And of course, it's many things. And all of the different identities of this gathering merge and separate and come together in various ways according to circumstances. And for me, what's very important is to look at what happens when you are part of a gathering which reaches a certain size and keeps getting bigger and bigger because things are different when the quantity of people is big. And I think one of the very interesting things which Baba did from the early days of the BKs way back in the 1930s is he always put us in small groups. In the very beginning, the gathering started in Karachi, Hyderabad, and then moved to Karachi. And when it moved to Karachi, it was quite a big group, 200 or 300. And so Baba gathered the group into different houses according to the people's circumstances. And then in the 50s, everyone moved to Mount Abu, and there everyone was together. And it was the first time that everyone was with Brahma Baba, because there had been the court order to separate the family from Brahma Baba, but after partition, that was no longer valid. And from Mount Abu, it was what was called the beggary part, because the BKs didn't have so much money as a family. And Baba had made it into a trust where all the assets of the people who dedicated themselves to this practice of Raj Yoga and to the family, the Brahmin family. And it was set up as a traditional extended Indian family where all the assets are pooled. But because the people were not related biologically, it was made into a trust. And the young women who then became the dadis, they were the trustees. And this was Baba's revolutionary step to put all the assets, the money, property, everything in the hands of young women. And the society was absolutely shocked and aghast at this most extraordinary activity and act that he had done. And from the very beginning, there has been this issue of the patriarchal society, which classifies women as items of property to be owned by men in different relationships to them. And they had no more rights than an animal has regarding their being owned by the owners, farmers or whatever. And so Baba wanted to change this situation. And this is an ongoing issue, even now, some nearly 90 years later, it's still an issue, because the society that we live in is somewhat fluctuating depending on who's in charge, what kind of government it is. But at the moment, the patriarchal energy is very, very strong. Sometimes it's less strong. Women have more rights, but recently these have been eroded very substantially. So it is a more patriarchal time. And then when we look at ourselves, the BK gathering, some people call it an institution, some people call it an organization, some people call it the Brahmin family. And I think that your word for this depends on your position, your relationship within it. And there is something of a divide between those who have official functions in the organization in an administrative capacity and those who don't. And so the people who have an administrative function, they tend to be very involved in meetings and organizing events and having greater or lower positions, different titles within the organization. And then the others are just there, part of the audience, who are helping in many different ways. And those ones tend to feel themselves more connected as family members. And then we also talk about the Yagya. So people who are in organizational positions, they say the organization is the Yagya. Then there are a few other people who say there is the organization and there is the Yagya. So I'm one of those people. And so I would also like to talk about why I'm thinking like that and what difference it makes. And so we will take that up in some of the opening remarks. And all of this is very much connected with our relationship with each other. So if we are identifying ourselves as souls who are in the relationship with Brahma Baba and Mama as Brahmins, we identify ourselves that we have been given alokik birth. And in fact, it's interesting, the definition of a Brahmin in Hinduism is someone who is born twice. And so we are called the mouth-born Brahmins. And so you have a birth, physical born through your mother and father, and you have this other, which we call alokik birth, and we get to be called Brahmins. And so the matter of being a Brahmin has everything to do with recognition that Shiv Baba is incorporeal God and he speaks through Brahma. He adopts us as his children and makes us into Brahmins. And so we live according to certain lifestyle and we study. We relate to Shiv Baba not only as our father, but also our teacher, and also the Satguru. So the Satguru is defined as the one who takes you into nirvana. And he says that we are at the end of the cycle. This is the last birth, which means what you're about to do is hopefully your last death. You might die and then take another birth, but in general, you are encouraged to consider this is your last birth, and so you have to finish all your karmic accounts and create the sanskar, the last sanskar of leaving your body voluntarily, as opposed to being taken by death. And then when you are like this completely free, karmatit, then you go with Shiv Baba in the great gathering of souls who leave the world at the end of the cycle and return to nirvana and then come back again according to your predestined part in the drama. So all of this is Gyan, which is also called Shrimat. And Baba says that Shrimat, there's lots of different definitions of Shrimat, which sometimes create confusion. So I'd also like to clarify the meaning of Shrimat at the present time, because it's different now from what it was when Shiv Baba was speaking and having a direct, through the physical medium interaction. And so we'll talk about that. So spiritual relationships, something deep, something special, something that we experience only in the confluence age. So let me begin to go through the material, which some of you must have read, but some of you may not. So, spiritual relationships. The difference between spiritual and physical relationships can be clearly articulated. However, the impact of the patriarchal system is so powerful and so much part of human conditioning that it is almost impossible to live according to spirituality. And this is because people have internalized the concepts that are encouraged in the patriarchal system, and which are actually the opposite of what Shiv Baba is telling us. And they're really strong. And people, when they study the spiritual knowledge, they know it theoretically quite well. But to make that theoretical knowledge come into your being so totally that it becomes like natural, and it informs all the things you do, the ways you think, and so on. But when it's theoretical, then when you're making a speech or doing a talk, then you have it. But when you're in interaction, then you don't have it, because you revert back to the patriarchal system, because you were raised in that. There are very, very few matriarchal systems in the world, and all of them are very small groups, mostly indigenous people, and what we call the people of the Western civilization, the people of India, the people of the conventional religions, the Buddhists, the Muslims, the Christians, the Jews, the Hindus, all are strongly patriarchal. And that means that there's a bias favoring males and going a bias against females. And I want to talk about how this plays out when you're trying to develop yourself spiritually, and how you get obstructed by having internalized the patriarchy to such an extent that you don't even know that that's going on. It's a little bit easier for women to feel the pressure of the patriarchy because it creates different situations that is harmful for them, and so they notice it. But for the males who are in the patriarchal system, very few can really sense it, how it plays out. And most of the males are so used to being in a dominant position and are trained to think that this is natural, so they don't notice. So physical relationships are based on gender, name, class, caste, religion, body color, race, nationality, economic bracket, and other similar matters of identity which slot the individual into a mold or a processing circumstance that is made of several elements. So these elements include how the child is raised. A child is raised according to the culture, and you are indoctrinated according to that through how you're raised. The same thing with your education. Legal is because the laws are designed to support a disbalanced system, which is biased always against women, against people of color, and in favor of those who are the dominant males. The same applies in the medical system, hospital system, political system, financial system, and all the social systems. So the mold depends on the dominant culture and religion of the community into which the individual is born. And all this depends on the power of the state and its desire to control the people. The more patriarchal the state, the more they want women to produce babies so that they have little boys to become soldiers and defend the country, and they have free labor because women tend to not get paid for what they do, or very, very low pay. So that's very advantageous for the state. The religious, philosophical, and state authorities segregate people accordingly, and they enforce the biases by law. So even if it may be immoral or unjust, but if it's the law, then that's that. And you can't do anything about it because the force of the law is greater than common sense very often. Okay. So these biases arise from the patriarchal system, which declares that the patriarchal system is natural and not man-made. So this is based in science, biology, anthropology, all of this. So in Europe, the people who wanted to prove that the male dominance was natural used various lab experiments to do that. So, for example, they had a zoo which had a very large number of male apes with a very small number of female apes. And so because of that imbalance in the ratio between the genders, the males were very forceful against each other, fighting for the attention of the female, and they become very abusive towards the females and dominant. And this was a very artificial circumstance because in the wild, this gender ratio doesn't exist. And this male ape aggression and dominance towards female apes also doesn't exist. But they use this circumstance in the zoo to prove that male dominance is natural and that, of course, humans are descended from apes. So both of those is not exactly true. And this is why I say that the patriarchal system uses various examples from nature to prove its claims. However, the proofs are flawed. And when you examine these proofs, it actually proves the opposite of what the patriarchal authorities declare. So there is a narrative that is more ancient. There is a narrative that the more ancient a religious and moral authority is, the more they represent incontrovertible truth. This is because in many religious communities and in old communities, they really believe that what the ancestors said is the truth. And so they will say that the ancestors said such and such a thing, and then everybody will believe that it's the truth. But sometimes what the ancestors said and what the people say the ancestors said is not the same. And the other thing is that the historical time before the arising of the patriarchal system is disregarded. So the patriarchal system arose basically around the 5th century, seriously. And whatever was going on before that time, they don't talk about it. So in the Western world, misogyny rests upon the declarations of Hesiod, the ancient Greek historian. So Hesiod said that women are another race and they are liars and cheats and they cannot be trusted, and that you should definitely try to control them as much as possible and prevent them from being free or having any kind of rights. But he said this in a context that people don't really know what the context was. And the context in which he said it was that the Greek warriors would go off and fight against other tribes who were not Greek, so different races. And when they had superior military weapons and strength, and they would do a lot of raping and pillaging, and they would take prisoners, and the women prisoners, they would make them into sexual slaves. And this happens in any war, even at the present time, it's still happening. And so whenever you do that, because rape is definitely a recognized weapon of war in times of war. And when you want to take a woman who you have raped and made into a prisoner, you can't expect that she will not do something against you. That is absolutely normal. And so this is what he's talking about, that sometimes the women would kill the man while he was sleeping after his sexual activities and so on. And then they apply this to all women, you see, but it doesn't apply to all women in ordinary situations. It applies specifically in the context of women prisoners who are abused and taken and made into slaves. So, but nobody hears about that, you see. In India, misogyny arises from the Manusmriti. So the Manusmriti, I don't know if you've read that, but it's quite a detailed book all about how you should control women and girls, limit them. A man should marry a girl who is 1/3 of his age, and so the idea of child marriage. And so you have absolute control over this girl who really doesn't know what's going on. She doesn't have a right to education, and she is all alone in a hostile circumstance. So, so this is considered foundation of civilized society in India. And what happens out of that is that the girls, in order to survive, they have to become manipulative. They're in survival. They have to look after themselves. Very often they don't have adequate food, no money, all property is taken away from them. So it's a difficult situation to operate in. And they are very severely limited by the institution of the mother-in-law, with the promise that later on she can become a mother-in-law and she can give as good as she got to the next generation of women. And the patriarchy also causes circumstances where, in order to get any amount of power or recognition or value in the society, the exchange is that you have to keep the younger women down and become an abuser yourself. So this is all very, it's not ancient, this is relatively modern, and the ancient ways are conveniently disregarded. So it becomes an issue because it's an escalation. And eventually, when you're talking about spirituality, you say, okay, now what's really going on here? And especially since Shiv Baba says, well, you know, you're a soul, genderless, so what's going on here? So the Abrahamic religions, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, and all subsidiaries of these religions are pretty much entirely patriarchal in nature, and their scriptures were formally put together in the 5th century, which corresponds more or less with the setup of Vedic India by the Shankaracharyas. And Adi Shankaracharya lived in the 8th century, and he was responsible for destroying the ancient Indian scriptures and replacing them with writings in Sanskrit language designed to prove that Advaita Vedanta is the original philosophy of India. So most people don't know this because they're not taught about this in school or university. But if you research, you find it's very easy to know about this, but you have to work to get a hold of the information. And almost all available literature in the English language declares that Vedic India and the Vedas were written as early as 1100 before the current era, which corresponds to the start of the Bronze Age. So that corresponds to what BKs call the Copper Age. So now there's a big difference because it really happened in what we call the Iron Age, but they believe that it happened from the beginning of the Copper Age. So many BKs really don't make a distinction between what happens in the Copper Age and what happens in the Iron Age, because the things of the Copper Age were actually destroyed, disregarded, put away, hidden, and something else was put in their place, and that's drama. Now, God is not interested in acquiring power over people. This is, I think, quite an important statement, because most of the religions tell the faithful that God is dangerous, God is angry, God will punish them unless they behave in a certain way, and you have to surrender to God and put yourself down and put God up and so on. This is a religious attitude created by religious authorities, but you know, God is the almighty authority, the omnipotent one, already has all the power, and there's no need to push it down people's throats. He's already omnipotent. And he defines the human being as a genderless soul. The BKs translate the word jivatma as human being in the Muralis. But jivatma, if you look at the actual word, jiv means body and atma means soul. So jivatma means embodied soul. But if you say jivatma is human being, this translation takes your attention away from the soul and towards the body, because a human being is either a male or a female, but an embodied soul depends on what kind of body it is, but the body is just an object. The being is not an object. So the consequence is that the overwhelming majority of BKs, while using the phrase see the soul, are mostly only able to see the body. You know, you hear this expression, Chinese souls, sisterly souls, brother souls, so they will assign bodily characteristics to the soul, even though they know otherwise. But it's become common way of speaking, and I think it's good to flag that up. So in spite of having the knowledge of God, the BK organization has become locked into the culture of patriarchy and is therefore less able to administer the large gathering according to spiritual relationships. This is circumstantial. The problem for the BKs since the beginning is that you are trying to communicate something very, very new into a social environment that is hostile to that newness. And you want to make them less hostile. You want to make them comfortable with you. You want to make them approve of you. And in the process, slowly, you start to become the same as the surrounding community. And that's just circumstantial, and it happened like that, and that's just the way it is. But at the same time, I think it's quite useful to have a look and see, okay, this is something that has happened. How should we relate to that? So there is a fundamental difference in perception and definition of a human being if you see it from the point of view of the Yagya as compared with the point of view of the BK organization. So the way I look at it is the Yagya is spiritual and the organization is physical. And the Yagya refers to the creation of a monarchy or empire in the coming civilization, not now. And the BK organization was set up according to the laws of India and wherever you happen to be. So it has to be set up as a quasi-democratic institution because that's the way of the legal system. Whether it's India or any other country where it exists as a non-profit organization, association, trust, or other legal entity. So to me, the word Yagya refers to the spiritual practice, the study of Gyan and Yoga, and the extended BK family. This is the Yagya, us. So the way I look at it, and according to the documents of the BK organizations in different countries and the constitution of the BKs in India, it really refers to four elements because you are, the organization is so that you can do your process of communicating the knowledge to the general public. So for that, you need somewhere to do it. So it refers to property, which is rented or owned by the BK organization. Secondly, the creation and distribution of literature on paper, digital, or any other form of communication for the public. This doesn't apply to communication among BKs. That also means it doesn't apply to the Murlis, but it's literature that you make to get other people who don't know Gyan to like it and appreciate it and come and take the course and come and become a BK. Once you become a BK, then you're not a member of the public anymore. Then for that, you need a bank account and you have to be tax-free and all this. Because everything is run by donations, contributions in cash or kind, which you need for paying for the property and the activities of public service. So there's also a very clear difference when money is used for public service and money is used to sustain the dedicated BKs. And nowadays this is all blurred, but in the beginning of Gyan, it was really quite separate. So then the fourth thing is events, so public service, so events like lectures, seminars, conferences, etc., that target the general public. And that's not for BKs. BKs, you need classes, you need Murlis, but you're talking to your own family members. You're not talking as an organization to the general public. But you can see that once you start to have very large numbers of people, then all of this automatically gets very blurred. And most of the people who call themselves BKs are not BKs in the sense that it was in the very beginning, when it was very clear if you're a BK or you're not a BK, either you were dedicated BK or you were not. But this changed over time. So the Yagya applies to the relationship between BKs and Brahma Baba, Mama, and the Dadis. So this is the spiritual family in which the family members are adopted by Shiv Baba through the mouth of Brahma. It is set up similarly to a traditional Indian extended family in which the assets of each member are pooled for sustaining the family. So you don't need an organization for that. But when the people are not blood related, then you do need an organization. So at the same time, Baba would always say the Shaktis, the sisters, are the guides. The Pandavas, the brothers, are the gods. So he had all kinds of ways in which to put the sisters in front and the brothers to take a background position. And this was his way of achieving a much more egalitarian relationship between all the souls, because he didn't see people as bodies, he saw people as souls. He also said there is only one father and mother, and all the rest are sisters and brothers who are obligated by that relationship to give each other respect and love. Only the mother and father are senior, that is Brahma Baba, Jagadamba Saraswati, and those to whom the mother and father gave responsibilities became considered as relatively senior. So naturally there is a hierarchy as in any family situation, but it was all very much according to the leadership of the parents, the mother and father. So this works when you have a relatively small family, but when the family is so big, and now we have over 1 million, you can't function like that anymore. So you get a different relationship between people. And sometimes there are issues around that. So we can look at that in terms of spiritual relationships. Yes. So the BK organization is an interface between the Yagya and the countries where it operates public service activities. So it is, in my opinion, essential to make a clear distinction between the Yagya and the organization. And as long as there is no distinction made or the distinction is blurred, there will be problems regarding the nature of relationships. So if an individual BK identifies the self according to the organization, they remain bound in the disbalanced conventional patriarchal system. And, you know, the patriarchal system is like this, that people belong to whoever is in charge in a system that is not very different from slavery. But in BK, we use the word belonging to talk about as a very nice feeling. You feel you belong, you're not isolated, you're part of it. But belonging also means that you don't have any freedom, you don't have any rights. You're not allowed to go to this center, you have to go to that center. You're not allowed to talk to those people because they don't belong to your center. And it creates these kinds of problems in some cases. And it gradually becomes part of the culture, and people don't know that that's not how it should be, because it came like that, and nobody talked about it. So it gradually reverted back to a traditional patriarchal system, and many people think, well, that's Srimat, or that's how it is, but not necessarily. If a BK identifies themselves according to Gyan and the Yagya, they're comfortable only when their relationships are spiritual and consensual. That means you're not comfortable if you get forbidden to talk to somebody or obliged to do something which doesn't suit your conscience. This sort of thing becomes an issue, you see what I mean? So the people who have the title RC, NC, CC, or any other kind of C means coordinator. So the coordinators are all playing a role in the organization. And this was a decision that was made some few years ago that we'll use the word coordinator. It used to be in charge, and then it became coordinator. So the organization at the present time is set up more or less like an international corporation. And so because you're centralized in India, then you have regions, and then you're under the region, but then you have different countries in the region. So then you have a NC, which is a national coordinator, and then you coordinate the centers in your country, and then under the national coordinator, there are center coordinators, and then there may be other coordinators of other things, but it's a very hierarchical setup, and you have a title according to your role. And then on the other hand, we have other titles which Baba gives us, like Swadarshana Chakradhari, the spinner of the cycle of self-realization. That's our title. And Trilokinath is our title. The Lord of the Three Worlds is Shiv Baba's title, but it's also our title. And Trinetri, the ones with the third eye. So we have spiritual titles, which are given to us by Shiv Baba. And then we have physical titles, which are according to the organization. And they do not necessarily correspond with each other. Many people think that if you are spiritually very elevated, then only you will have an elevated position in the organization. And if you have an elevated position in the organization, it proves that you're spiritually elevated. But it doesn't always work like that. You need different capacities to be effective in the organization, and different capacities to be elevated spiritually. And sometimes it coincides, but not always. So all the people with a position of responsibility in the organization are also relatively senior in the Yagya. And it is in their interest to ensure that organization and Yagya are indistinguishable. So for them, it's all one and the same thing. But it's not in the interest of those who do not hold an official position of responsibility in the organization. And this is because a lot of people, they meet you and they say, okay, what is your position in the organization, so that they can find out whether or not to respect you. And if a person doesn't have a position of responsibility in the organization, then people will think that, well, they are of no consequence, they're of no interest, they're not important. And then they will relate to them in a body conscious way as a lower quality being, because they're not really using the third eye to see what kind of a being do I have in front of me. They don't have that capacity necessarily. So when the Yagya and organization are small, it is not an issue. But when it reaches a certain size, it becomes an issue. Because when you have a very big organization, very few are really high quality yogis, but you need lots of people to run an organization. So this session of EGY is about spiritual relationships. So we will restrict our discussions to the spiritual relationship between those Brahma Kumars and Kumaris who consider themselves Raj Yogis and who know each other in the context of the study and practice of Raj Yoga, rather than in the context of the organization. There's the two very different contexts. So we're really looking at our relationship with ourselves and with each other as like friends, classmates in the spiritual study, and we discuss the Gyan. We don't discuss organizational matters particularly because it's not relevant, not of interest. So EGY, we are making the assumption that EGY is a loose gathering of BKs who have known each other since several decades. You know, many of us known each other for 30, 40, 50 years. And most of the people are not born in India or of Indian parentage, but at the same time, there are many of Indian ancestry living in the Western world who are part of the EGY gathering. And there are also many who are not in Gyan since decades, maybe newly in Gyan. And so they don't necessarily know each other, because in the early days, it was a very small group, so we all knew each other. Now it's big. So those who are not in Gyan since decades, but they feel connected and they want to be closer. So this is roughly who is part of EGY. So there are important common elements that bind together this online gathering of people, what makes us be part of EGY. So EGY people, they like to be or become soul conscious. They like the Murli. They like Shiv Baba and Brahma Baba and the Dadis. They feel motivated to work together or separately to make the world a better place. They consider themselves as Raj Yogis. They feel a deep and ancient connection with each other and assume this is an eternal connection, past, present, and future. They consider themselves as part of the Yagya more than the organization, and they may even become disconnected from the organization, but will always remain part of the Yagya. And there may be other common elements. So in this session of EGY, that means today and tomorrow, we will look at the spiritual relationship between people who feel bound together on the basis of these 7-8 elements. So spiritual relationship, this is the way I'm defining it. Spiritual relationship is about how we treat each other, how we respect each other, care for each other, setting limits and boundaries, how we deal with taboo subjects, trauma, karmic accounts and bondages, private life, culture, rights and responsibilities in the context of each other. And I also feel that spiritual relationship is distinct from physical relationship in the same way Shrimat is distinct from Parmat and Manmat. So I think I'd like to stop there because we did a whole bunch of things about organization, Yagya, and so on that I think we might want to talk about. And then we'll go to the other part in detail tomorrow. So maybe we'll just stop for a moment of silence to digest some of that. And ask yourself the question, what are you? A soul with a body? Are you in the Yagya, the organization? Are you patriarchal, matriarchal? How do you like to be with your spiritual friends, classmates? What is spiritual life for you? Shanti. So let me hand it over to Sister Rose and Sister Vanji.
Shanti, Sister Denise. The question that came to my mind is for those people with a position of responsibility in the organization, as well as in the sense they're also considered as seniors in the Yagya. Why is it in their interest not to distinguish the Yagya and the organization, that it be considered as one? And because, like, as far as I remember, I have heard this distinguishment from you. And that's why I think for those who are hearing you for the first time or just joining in, maybe this is also their first time to hear of this difference between organization and Yagya. So that's my question. Why not make that distinguishment?
Why not make it is because if you have a position, people assume that you are spiritually elevated, and very often I've heard people say the person has been selected by Baba Some of them, yes. Most of them, no. They were self-selected in some cases. They proposed themselves to do that work in most cases. And the work of being an administrator is different from the work of being a yogi. And when you're an administrator, one of the things that I have heard from many of the people who are in administrative positions is that the work of the administrator is so demanding and so time-consuming that it tends to interfere with their spiritual practice, and it also tends to make them very tired. And when you're very tired, it's more difficult to be really subtle, really fresh in the early morning, tvela and things like this. And you also get people who, the tendency is, okay, you are looking like really good in service, in communicating the knowledge from a very young age. And so you get kind of slotted into a position of being in front in the field of service. And over the years, you get pushed more and more into an administrative function. And if you're really strong, like the dadis, you were able to maintain a balance of gyan and yoga, service and yoga. And also the size of the BK world was small, but now it's really large. And the amount of property and events and projects and all of these things that are going on is really increasing enormously, whereas the attention on going into the depth of the study and creating deep literature about what Raj Yoga is really all about, there's not much attention on that. And I think it's a matter of people who are in position in the organization. They need to say the organization and the Yagya is one and the same thing, because that's how they live it, that's how they feel it, that's how they talk about it, in spite of the fact that it puts them, in many cases, out of balance. And also they might find themselves in situations where they function in the process of carrying out their duties as part of the organization. They function in ways where it may infringe on people's human rights. And you know that I did include the Declaration of Human Rights as the part of the material for these two sessions, because people will sort of revert back to the patriarchal system of owning people, of ordering people, of limiting people's rights and freedoms, of taking the law into their own hands because they have a lot of challenges. So it's very easy to revert back to the worldly way of functioning. And you also get people who come into quite high positions in the organization who didn't have so much background in the spiritual practice. So their spiritual practice is weak. And it's better for them to say the Yagya and the organization is the same, because then they can quite easily disguise the fact that their spiritual practice is weak. And then people who are not in the organization and they are students, they are what we call trustees, And people who just say, well, I want to, I will be cooperative in service. I will help financially, time-wise, talent-wise, and so on. But you see, you get into a culture where the emphasis is more and more and more on service and less and less and less imbalance on the other things. And then people who are not in high organization positions, they cannot disguise the fact that their spiritual practice is weakened. And then they feel, I need to get back into balance. I need to pull back on the work that I do as an administrator, as an organization person, because I'm actually in this for the spiritual practice, not for the administrative work, which is anyway voluntary. So for them, they really feel, no, I'm a Yagya person. I must pay attention to my yoga, my spiritual practice, and I will do what I can in service, but I have a priority to myself, to my yoga, and I will not let that get eaten into. And there you find that creates a discrepancy between Yagya and organization. And because there's such a large group of people with so many various activities and so on, it's beginning to show that organization is something and Yagya is something. And you sometimes find it getting quite polarized. And so for me, I think it's useful to make a distinction because I think it enables the people who are having a very heavy administrative load to shed some of that load, and maybe some other people can pick up some of that work so that they are not exhausted, so that they are able to establish balance in their spiritual process. And of course, everyone's getting older, and as you get older, you get tired more quickly, more easily. You have to deal with physical illnesses and all this type of thing. So it's just, I feel it's quite worthwhile to distinguish these for practical purposes, and for us to be able to sustain this for however long we are still alive, like that.
Thank you, Sister Denise. Actually, for myself, it was a relief actually when I heard the distinguishment between the Yagya and the organization. And I think mostly BKs came, it's for their spirituality. It's not really to do all this administration work.
Yeah, that's right. That's why I think all of us came, because we want to develop and further our study and our spiritual practice. That's key and crucial. And yes, we like to include other people to give the message and everything, but it needs to be in balance.
Vanjiben?
I have a question. Baba refers to the Brahmins as protectors of the Yagya. Have we, as Brahmins, or how is that operationalized? Is it operationalized by being an administrator and carrying out the administrative and organizational functions, especially because I think it was in year 2000 when the idea of a global functioning was how BK started to operate. And what I personally noticed was there was so much emphasis on public service. And I will always say, where's my spiritual development. So would you mind to elaborate on that, explain it to us, clarify?
Well, I think that it's, 2000, that's nearly 25 years ago, right? And a lot of things have happened since then, and the organization and the family has grown. But at the moment, it's growing differently. It's growing a great deal in India and among the Indian diaspora, but it's not growing much among the Western people. And I think this is also an indication that the way the organization presents itself is much more relevant and easy access to people who are of an Indian background and who relate to the political world of India. There's a very close connection between BKs and the Prime Minister of India. The President of India is herself a BK. And there's more attention in the Brahma Kumaris on India and the Indian diaspora. In former times, there was a lot of interest in reaching out to the other races, religions, communities, to make it an inclusive worldwide organization. But that seems to have shifted now. And so protector of the Yagya, I think, can have many meanings. One is you want to protect the Yagya as organization and maintain the public face, the reputation, the standing, the importance, and all of this. But on the other hand, if you are somebody who is less concerned with the Brahma Kumari's organization and are more concerned with the Yagya, with the idea of the Yagya being this flame of spirituality, you want to keep it pure. You give a lot of importance to the quality of people. You want to take care of the Brahmins. You want to encourage people to go deep, to have high quality yoga, to sustain that flame. And public service is of less importance when you're focusing on that. I think when public service becomes, I think even Dadi Janki had said, people are 95% interested in service and 5% interested in yoga and study. And she wanted it the other way around, because she said that, if you are giving 95% attention on your study and practice and yoga, the service will happen automatically. And she was the person who was my mentor. So I very much took to heart the things that she would say. And, that's how I understand what Raj Yoga is. And so I'm really also speaking from that perspective. And so protector of the Yagya has to do with protecting the purity of who you are, what you do as not just an individual, but with the other Brahmins that you work with. And because it's a gathering of people who are connected with God. And when you have a gathering like that, you have a rosary who are connected with a thread of love and respect for each other. And this is what creates the atmosphere, the vibration. And also the Yagya is a fire, big fire. And it's a fire that purifies the world. And the world is very impure. and getting more and more impure. So as you become very pure and the world becomes very impure, there's tension, there's a problem between the two. And my understanding of this process of Raj Yoga is, if we, as practitioners of this practice of purity and meditation and connecting with God and being instruments or channels for this vibration to pass through us, and we try to amplify it and make it tangible, this will be what creates this big transformation. And so I find that of much greater interest than the kind of public service that people in BK are favoring at the moment, which to me looks almost exactly the same as the kind of public service that any other organization is doing. And so if there's no difference, then what's going on, like that.
Thank you.
Sister Denise, the value system of the Yagya and the organization are quite different, especially if the organization is set up as like a quasi-democratic system. So it's a very, shall I say, tricky road to tread when one is involved in the organization as well as part of the Yagya.
It is. There's a very interesting thing which is exclusive to India. And India is a land that has been a matter of kings and princes, rajas, maharajas, for long, long time, many, many centuries. And when India and Pakistan and West Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh, when they separated after they got independence from the colonial powers of Europe, they decided, India decided to become a secular republic. And they created a constitution of that secular republic, which, they became a secular republic in 1948. And the constitution was put into effect, I think it was around 1954 or something. And it took a while to put it together. And it was put together by a committee of people, and many of them were from the Shudra caste. And so the majority of Indian people from the higher caste didn't accept it because they don't like Shudras. You see, Gandhi, one of his aims was to remove untouchability and to remove the word Shudra. But you see, the caste system in India was there for centuries, and it's very much part of people's thinking. And so what happened in India is effectively you had by the government and the court system and so on was according to democracy, but the social attitudes was not. And so they managed to have these two completely opposing systems happening side by side miraculously. But when you export that into another country, another culture, another religious background, it really doesn't work because people are not designed to operate mutually exclusive systems at the same time. So if you are a person who's raised in India, it's normal for you to do that. But if you are somebody from a Judeo-Christian background who's used to the democratic kind of laws and government and so on, and that it's many centuries since the kings were in charge. You don't have that in your makeup, and so you can't do it. You're either one or the other. Whereas for somebody raised in India in that situation, being both is fine, you know. And so I think that this is also why the Brahma Kumaris can operate very well in India, but it's not having the same, it's not the same inspirational force in the Western world. When it started in the 1970s in the Western world, it was exotic. Mm-hmm. And it was something that everyone was looking for, and people had lots of spiritual experiences, and it was just so easy to take it on. And also the organization was very small. I think when I came in, it was about 15,000 total. And that was little, you know, and everybody knew each other and so on. But, you know, it's different now. And so size makes a difference. Cultural differences are real and have to be taken into consideration. And sometimes they're really not. So we're talking about these things because so many of the people I'm in contact with experience a problem trying to work out these things that don't seem to tally with each other, and they don't really know why or what to do about it, if anything.
One of my last questions before I get the questions from here. In spiritual friendship, is there such a thing as accountability?
Well, that's a very, very interesting and good question, because I think there is. When you come into relationship with someone, you have to understand that although theoretically we are all 1 million brothers and sisters, and in fact the whole of humanity is brothers and sisters, but within that context, you have your circle of people. And then you will say, okay, these are my spiritual friends. These are people I know. These are people I relate to, I resonate with, I spend meaningful time with, I do service with, I spend time in study and interaction and so on. So there is accountability, the accountability that I must interact with them according to my principles, because they will expect that from me. I will expect that from them. And because you're in interaction with each other, anytime something moves outside that line, then you have to negotiate the relationship. You have to set your boundaries. You have to clarify what is respect with each other, and this is going to make quality relationships. And I think that's a very, very important part of why we are doing this, you see, because we're not in isolation. We're not sannyasis. We are souls who know each other from maybe many births. And we may also have karmic accounts with each other, and they will come up in the relationships, and we have to sort it out.
So, Sister Denise, there are a few questions here in the Zoom as well as in the Facebook. Are there not some individuals on the Yagya side who take the opportunity of being far from the organization to slacken a bit?
Well, I really don't know, because you can slacken a bit for all sorts of reasons. If you are surrounded by a lot of other Brahmins in the context of the organization, there's a lot of pressure to keep you in line. and keep your disciplines going and all of that. So if you are more on your own, then you're responsible to keep that going. So you could slacken. But then what also happens is within the context of the organization and service, you may overwork, get out of balance, and you will not slacken in terms of service, but you will slacken in other areas of yoga, murli, all these things. And so either way, there's opportunity to slacken and also opportunity to not slacken. But one thing that Baba used to emphasize a great deal when we were having personal interaction with Avyat Bap Dada, he used to emphasize a lot on balance of Gyan and yoga, balance of service and yoga, because obviously he could see that people can easily get out of balance by getting too much into the service.
Thanks. Another question, talking about relationships. Baba said that the rosary beads are double. Vishnu is the combination of Lakshmi and Narayan.
Baba never said you could become Lakshmi or Narayan. It's always Lakshmi and Narayan. So that would presume that you get a turn at being Lakshmi and another turn at being Narayan. So that's 8. The Vishnu being the combination, this is symbolic. So there's only one Vishnu who is symbolic of the combination of Lakshmi and Narayan, and the image of Vishnu is there behind the throne of Lakshmi and Narayan, 1, 2, 3, up till 8. And then let's see what happens to Vishnu after that. And then he goes into the temples of the devotees. But you don't know who you are. You don't know who the other people are. There are, obviously, all of us are very inspired by the dadis, especially the dadis that we know, and then people that we hear about. But I think at the moment, now that Baba has stopped coming directly, and the daddies have moved to a new role in drama. All of them have taken rebirth and they're doing something else. And what I think we need to do is really look at the study, because it's very, very deep. And we had so much of it that there really wasn't time to, spend 4 or 5 days on one murli, because every day you get another one. And Avyat Bap Dada was speaking every 2 or 3 days, and then it became once a week, then once in 2 weeks, then once in a month, then once in, not so often. And so we have still a huge amount of study that we need to sit with and develop. And I think this is also a very good moment to sort of step back and really look at, okay, what am I doing? What is this? Because Baba has said everything now. It's not still coming, it's done. And, at the end of the last one, he said samapti. And I was there at that time and I thought, oh my God, this is it, finished. And now we have to look at what he gave us in terms of the family, in terms of the knowledge, in terms of different instructions that he's given us. Have we done that? Are we doing it? So, yeah, I think look at it like that.
Another comment here. Baba said in today's Murli that all BK centers belong to him, not to human beings. I feel sometimes a kind of unexpressed tension between some centers. It is sad to see such situation.
Yeah, well, we looked at how this kind of thing can happen. And it's very good to remember that all these centers belong to Shiv Baba, and you also belong to Shiv Baba, not to anyone. So so you have to sometimes affirm that.
Another question. What is the goal of the Brahma Kumaris? Is it to awaken and connect with God to purify as many people as possible, or creating a realm where only 8 rule and others will be subjects because they have not gained power? It is for if it is for collective awakening, why the same techniques that were used in Om Mandali not continued to be used?
Well, again, you have several different questions here. So the goal of the Brahma Kumaris is to become karmatit individually. And the goal of the Brahma Kumaris organization is to get people to recognize that what they have is truth, very important information, and that God is speaking through Brahma Baba, and that they have this information and they want to make it available to everyone, and who may or may not take it up. And then there may be other agendas, sub-agendas. The goal of the Brahma Kumaris Yagya is to, I think, bring the fire of yoga to a very highest intensity, which enables the switch over from the Iron Age to the Golden Age. And the methods of Om Mandali at the beginning, all of these things were in process of being figured out, and you can't apply the methods of the 1920s and 30s to 100 years later. The world is different. And at that time, Baba was working with very young children and a few older people, but it was a tiny little family, and they were all in the context of colonial India. And, you know, things change. You cannot apply the same methods of the 1920s and 30s to now. And that was a very small group of people who all came from the same background. Now you have tons and tons of people from all different backgrounds. You've got email, internet, artificial intelligence. They didn't have anything even close to that. It's a very, very different world now. And the world population has maybe quadrupled in that time, and circumstances beyond everybody's imagination are now normal for us. So no, we have to keep up with the times. We have to be relevant to people. We have to honor what Baba is saying. Throughout Brahma Baba's lifetime, there were changes in the methods. There were several times when all the Murlis would be thrown away. He'd say, no, that's not it. It's something else. And then we'd all start again. And that's the way of the Yagya. It's like that. This is something that's been going on for, nearly 100 years. So many, many changes happen. And I think it is very important for us to every so often look at ourselves and rethink, at a very fundamental level. What is this? Are we doing what we think we're doing? Are there other ways to do it better? there's an importance of tradition, there's an importance of innovation, there's an importance of consensus, and all of these things are very relevant.
Thank you, Sister Denise. Vanji?
She picked my mind. Thanks, Sister Rose. Sister Denise, one of the ideas that seems to cut across many of the notes is the idea of, not the idea, but patriarchy, the institution or the system of patriarchy. And I want to understand if patriarchy is like the key wrong thing that happened that created body consciousness. And the other question is, in the Murlis, Baba would, or we are told in the Murlis that you take a male body, then a female body, interchangeably across the 84 births. So you have 42 male bodies and 42 female bodies. But how come patriarchy is so deeply ingrained that regardless of whether you have a female body, you still seem to have deep-seated patriarchal attitudes and values?
Yeah, well, it is because the concept of patriarchy has dominated India and the Western world for minimum 500 or 600 years. And the narrative in patriarchy is that it's been there for untold billions of years, and they disregard the fact that it's actually only 500 or 600 years, or 700 or 800 years, but it's not a very old thing. The patriarchy is institutionalized and enforced by the state. And it's therefore in the education system, it's in the legal system, the medical system, the financial system, all the different parts of the social system. Every human being from birth is conditioned and educated and made to fit and believe that the patriarchy is the natural order of things. And this is why it's so strong. And that is what body consciousness is. You see, you can say body consciousness and the patriarchal system is one and the same thing. Mm-hmm. Because all the religions, they say, God made men and women. The fundamental unit of humanity is either a male or a female. And there's no such narrative of we are spiritual beings in physical bodies. That's a new age little expression, and which people don't pay attention to, because the entire system of the world, the legal system, medical system, government system, everything is based on patriarchy. And to change that is virtually impossible. And Baba says, let's change it. And I will tell you how. And he tells us how, and we still don't do it. Because of the huge force of what you are indoctrinated with through the religions, the upbringing, the education system. And I think this is why he says, I am your father, teacher, and Satguru, and you must do what I say. And this is really very powerful statement, because as your father, he sees all of you as his sons. You know, mite bache means sweet sons. It doesn't mean sweet little babies. This word children is gives people a reason to allow themselves to be infantilized and treated like babies. And that is not very spiritual. And it's not very good for your mental, spiritual, psychological, or any other kind of health when you're an adult. And so you have to resist those things. That's just necessary. And patriarchy, there's this huge resistance to patriarchy, to the removal of patriarchy, because nobody knows what that would look like, and they're terribly afraid of not being dominant, those who are benefiting from it. So, but Chief Baba is more powerful than all of that put together. So let's see what he does. And but I think just for us to talk about it, there's a book that just recently came out that was flagged in the BBC, and I got it and looked at it. It was called Patriarchy, How Men Came to Rule, by an Indian woman called Angela Saini. And she describes it and researched it quite well. So anybody who wants to understand how it happened in terms of what she researched, it's quite interesting. Yeah.
So it's like I will have to understand it as part of being in a spiritual journey is to really rid yourself of the traces of patriarchy that are so deeply ingrained into the soul.
Well, that takes your whole life and more. It's a huge piece of work. And I think if you're in a female body, you can notice it more easily. But I've discussed this with some men who just don't know what I'm talking about. Can't see it. And it's like, you're talking nonsense. And I also found that in some of things that I've looked at and experienced recently, that there are some people that you see eye to eye with easily, and some people that it's impossible to see eye to eye with, and you just have to let it be. That's the way it is. No communication possible, no flow through of meaning. Should be theoretically possible, of course, but in practical terms, you do find that it doesn't happen. You have to live with that.
What's also running in my mind is one of the big other institutions, and this is very political, is this capitalist liberal system that again dominates the whole world, and it's men who are running the show.
Well, it's because the laws, religious laws and laws of the state are, they like women to produce lots of little boys so that they can grow up into soldiers, so that they can defend the nation or defend the religion and give their lives for that. So they need lots of little boys for that. And they need the women to be compliant and easily able to be exploited. And so if they are, that's kind of convenient. And, Baba really felt this difference. For example, there's this story about how he changed a picture of Lakshmi and Narayan, which showed Narayan having his feet massaged by Lakshmi. And then this was then used as a proof that if you're going to be a deity man, you have a very servile woman to look after your every need and fulfill your every desire and be a slave, and that was divine. And he said, no, that's not right. Who made this picture? That is not how Lakshmi and Narayan are. And he got a different picture, which has the Lakshmi Narayan that we use, which has Lakshmi and Narayan standing side by side, being in a relationship of equality. And I think this is a very important part of the BK message, that men and women need to understand that each one is a kind of Vishnu, which is androgynous. You are half male and half female, and you need to bring that into balance, so that if you are a very masculine male, you need to develop your feminine part. And if you are a very feminine woman, you need to develop your masculine part and learn how to stand up for yourself and all that sort of thing. But you see, the narrative in the religion mitigates against that. And it's very, very difficult to take down a religion that everybody's part of and all the bits and pieces that are connected with it, even if they weren't there in the beginning of that religion, but they are now. And so people say, in the name of God, it's like this, and don't argue, otherwise we'll kill you. If you do argue, they do kill you. There's a lot of that goes on. So people get pressured into compliance, and it's just part of the way people operate at the moment. And so if people start doing that in the context of our Raj Yoga practice, it's to be expected, that's you can't, how many people can really truly be soul conscious? 1 in a million.
1 in a million.
Well, so we have 1 million BKs, maybe we have one that's from above. But I think if we think that every BK can become Lakshmi and Narayan, we're dreaming. It's very, very few. And he keeps on saying everyone is number wise. And the thing that makes it a little more tricky is people who think that if you are in a high position in the organization, it means that you are that number in terms of spirituality, which may be in some cases, but not in all cases.
Thank you.
Denise, we have 3 minutes left. So this would be the last question for this session. This is from Facebook. As administration instruments are corrupted and manipulating others, I tend to avoid them to save myself from their influences. But I'm still confused whether it is stepping away from Baba's family and system. I also feel alone in the family and do not want to engage in many activities, service programs.
Well, I think that every single one of us comes to a point where we realize we can't have close friendship with everyone and we can't participate in all the activities because it's just too much. And I remember one time somebody was in that situation. Daddy Janki would give all sorts of things, do like this, do that, do this bhakti and this kind of study and so on. And somebody said to her very tearfully, I can't do that. And she said, well, it was only suggestions, I never said you had to do all of it. I think sometimes people think that they have to, but I don't think it's like that. naturally you will be inclined to what you prefer, and how much energy you can give to it, you give that. It needs to be optimum, not maximum. Because if it's optimum, you can sustain it. If it's maximum, you're going to burn out, and then it's not worth that, because you're here for the long term. So you have to, I think, instead of feeling isolated, take advantage of alone time, because a lot of people don't get it, and use your alone time to develop your meditation and your study. And when something comes up that you feel comfortable with, participate in that, and create a balanced life. This is all about balance, not about extremism.
Okay, Sister Denise. I think that's it for this session. And some of the questions have not been asked yet, so we'll address them tomorrow.
Mhm.
So,
Great. Thank you so much, both of
Thank
you
you.
and everyone. So we'll close with just a moment of silence. Thank you. Om Shanti. Om Shanti. Thank you.